Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Here to talk all things hockey are your hosts, Brad Crisco, Ryan Hanna, and Evan Lobsinger.
There's got to be something so disheartening about trying to make a run at a guy for laying a big hit on your teammate and then looking up and it's like a 6'6" Detroit Red Wings defenseman of your choosing. Say what you want about the actual toughness of these guys or whether they can fight, but we first saw it with Moritz Seider and now with Simon Edvinsson. They just look bored and annoyed. They put one hand on you and they put you to the ice like you're Hank putting Brad down after a hockey practice or something. It's actually, I have no idea if Simon Edvinsson's actually tough. He's just big and has all the leverage in the world.
There's two scenarios here that both could be true in that he is as big as strong as he made that look because it looked like he was putting a toddler to bed very gently. Or he's like Superman when he leaves Krypton and comes to Earth, and something about the Ottawa Senators organization just makes him infinitely stronger because they have not learned their lesson.
Because it was Crookshank.
Yep.
Yeah, when the Belleville Senators were, and we were there, and that was amazing, and he put him down, and then that's when Berggren was chanting, Rocky. Yeah, that whole ordeal was, I hope they keep trying. I mean, they did win the game in the end, it's a last laugh and all that, but preseason.
Nobody cares about wins and losses in preseason. We got the clippable memes, so we won the war.
Nearly 10% of the regular season's worth of games in preseason. I know we've beat this to death, but thank God that's over.
Yeah, this week actually was not pleasant to watch because even the games where the Red Wings had their big guys dressed, they didn't care to be out there. They were just getting loose, getting the hands warm, getting the timing up. They weren't forechecking hard. If they were in a situation where it looked like they might get hit, it was either a pass or a dump. Just like, we're just running through the motions to get out of here.
Preseason's over. Roster cuts have already started to come in. Folks are passionate. Lots of opinions are here. We're getting good at this thing. We've timed this well. We know the drill now. Folks, welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Here to talk to you about all things Detroit Red Wings hockey, the Atlantic Division preview, the world of the NHL, roster cuts, and so much more. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Hanna.
I'm Brad Crisco.
And I'm Evan.
On this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, we're here to talk to you about those Red Wings roster cuts that we just mentioned. Marco Kasper among those who were sent down. Justin Holl being waived. Is Austin Watson going to get a contract? That whole thing is going to be talked about. And then any other takeaways from preseason that we saw over those 100 seeming exhibition games. Some other NHL Red Wings news, and then we'll get into our interview with none other than Steve Dangle of the Steve Dangle podcast and his impressions on the Detroit Red Wings, the Atlantic Division, what's going on with the Leafs, and lots more. We'll do our own Atlantic Division full preview. That's not the Red Wings season preview. That's next episode. So an Atlantic Division preview of our predictions, analysis, etc. of the entire division, NHL news, and whatever else we have time for before overtime. Before all that, a couple things. First, our Winged Wheel Podcast Patreon is how this show is primarily supported, and an update for our patrons, which you may have already seen. It has been completely revamped, so it is going to be hopefully even bigger and better for all of you. Go check it out, and if you are new and want to join the Patreon, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast, you get access to benefits like our Patreon exclusive bonus overtime episodes, any bonus content that we put out there, our Patreon exclusive Discord. As well, you're automatically entered into all of our giveaways, which leads into my second item. We are giving away 2 tickets to every Detroit Red Wings home game this season, vast majority going directly to our Patreon supporters. The home opener ticket giveaway happens on Monday night. So become a patron, sign up on the form that you see pinned on the Patreon main page, enter, and we are going to give away those tickets on Monday night. Don't worry, we're going to be giving away tickets for all 41 Detroit Red Wings home games this season. All right, let's start with Justin Holl. The most predictable roster move of all time, or at least of this season, waived. Didn't make the cut as one of the Red Wings' 7 defensemen. 2 years left at $3.4 million. He's not going to get picked up by anyone. He's going to get cleared to go back to Grand Rapids Griffins in the AHL, and Detroit will get $1.15 million in cap relief, and more importantly, a free roster spot.
Yeah, going into the season with 12 forwards, 8 defensemen, and 3 goalies always seemed like a horrible idea. So we hypothesized all those situations where they could avoid that. This was the one that probably caused the least amount of pain, because Holl, at best, you could argue, is the 7th best defenseman on this team. And, you know, between him and Johansson, one of them would definitely get claimed on waivers. One of them would definitely not get claimed on waivers. If you don't want to lose either of them, okay, then you send the guy down who's definitely not going to get claimed. That being said, if someone is crazy enough to claim Holl, that would be some pretty big cap relief for the Red Wings and a borderline miracle. Now, things could happen. The Red Wings had a really unusual run of luck on health with defense last year. Expect to see him back at some point this season, just because he is still the 8th defenseman. So if someone goes down, it is likely him that is going to come up to spot fill if a Petrie or a Sherrod or a Mata gets hurt. But yeah, it was a move that had to be made, because you can't go into a season with 12 forwards, and none of the goalies played themselves out of a spot. So that one might take a little longer to resolve.
And even depending on what you think they should do with Berggren, like, you don't want to just give him away either, because same as Johansson, he's not waiver exempt. So you're not just going to give him away for free on waivers, and that's going to take time to figure out if you do want to do anything. So yeah, that's why this was a predictable move. Did Johansson do a lot, as you alluded to, Brad, to steal that spot and say, I'm staying up? No, he looked like a rookie who was having a hard time adjusting. He's looking like a guy where the number 7 D-man is appropriate for him right now. He needs an adjustment period. It's going to be rocky for him, but the path forward is one where you're hoping that he can take his time, get appropriate reps, sheltered games, sheltered minutes. When the moment calls for it, he steps in and then slowly gets warmed up to it. And then you see the Johansson that you saw in Grand Rapids a little bit more on the ice rather than what you saw in the preseason, which was just a guy who was trying to find his way in a much tougher test than he's ever seen before.
Yeah, he didn't look great. I was hoping for more from him. Obviously, there's going to be an adjustment period, and it's bigger, faster pace. Got to make your decisions quicker. We've talked about his good but not high-end tools, i.e. skating, puck handling, shot. So he's always going to have that uphill battle to adjust to the pace. There was just so many avoidable turnovers that he had in the preseason too. And you could tell it was just because he was trying to rush things because of the pace and just wasn't doing it well. And yet you could still make the case for him over Holl. So that's why we're sitting where we are right now.
Okay, so let's get into just the news of what's happened today or leading up to today. I'll start with Amadeus Lombardi was sent down to Grand Rapids, and kudos to him. Like, he was never really going to be in the mix for one of the very, very scarce roster spots at forward, if you can even say there are roster spots available at forward. But I think he showed himself well enough where next season he is going to be in that mix. It's not just going to be, whichever guys don't make it this season. I think there's a good chance that Amadeus Lombardi is, I think as Jeff Merrick put it, found money for Detroit, which we've been seeing for some time, but it's never a sure thing with those smaller framed but highly skilled guys who excel at the lower level. So kudos to Lombardi. But Detroit assigned the following players today to Grand Rapids, or in Brandsegg-Nygard's case, back to the SHL. Marco Kasper, who was one of Detroit's best players, period, all preseason. Nate Danielson, Carter Mazur, Cross Hannes, Soderblom, Tuomisto, Wallinder, Vero, Dello, Kosa, and Geilander and net. And as I mentioned, Michael Brandsegg-Nygard, we wondered whether he was staying in the AHL or go back to the SHL. He is indeed going back to Skelleftea, so he is going to be in Sweden another year. We talked about that before. 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. There might be a preference to see him in the AHL sooner to get him adjusted sooner, but the SHL is a top tier non-AHL league in the world, and so it's still going to be to his benefit. But let's do the big one here. Agree or disagree, Marco Kasper, just on merit alone, not talking about, all the waiver eligibility stuff, which I'll qualify in a minute here, earned a roster spot on the Red Wings with his preseason performance.
Unquestionably. I don't even think there's room for debate on that one. If you're a team trying to make the playoffs and your goal is to put out the 20 best players any given night on the roster, he's on it. Full stop. Obviously, all the other waiver stuff does factor in here. And that's not to say he might still be on the opening lineup on Thursday. We've seen teams do that before to kind of screw around with the waiver process and to gain advantages here and there. Don't know what benefit there would be on that front to the Red Wings right now. So I think it truly is just an assignment to Grand Rapids. I question the decision because, again, like you alluded to, he was not just one of the 12 best forwards on the team in the preseason. He was one of the best forwards on the team in the preseason, full stop. I don't know if the term kicking down the door applies here because it wasn't quite as dominant as Lucas Raymond's 3 years ago, but it was approaching that. Like, he's not going to ever be the big point producer that Raymond is, so it's hard to quantify it, but the counting stats were decent. The impact on the game was noticeable, and his overall 200-foot every facet of the game was impressive.
What we're talking about with the, waiver move up and down, the NHL has its teams have to be roster compliant by Monday, October 7th at 5 p.m. Eastern. And what Brad was alluding to is teams are going to be more crunched to make moves closer to, the start of puck drop on whether it's their season opener or whatever later in the week. For example, Detroit doesn't play until Thursday, despite their roster being due on Monday. If you make a move where you put someone on waivers later on, it is much less likely for a team to be able to capitalize on that and be able to accept that player into their system. Because when you pick someone up off waivers, you add a contract. You have a contract limit in the NHL. You can't just willy-nilly add contracts. So when you've kind of constructed your final roster and made all your cuts and everything like that, it's a lot harder to add that guy that's coming through waivers, and you often see more talented players clear waivers at this time of year than any other time. So the long and short of it is Kasper is waiver exempt. You send him down now. You keep a guy in your roster that you might be planning to waive later. For example, one of the goalies, or let's say you want to try to sneak Johansson or Berggren down there. Then you do that later on when teams are a little bit more strapped. That is just it could happen this way. I tend to agree with you, Brad. It does feel more like a send down that Kasper's not going to start the season in the NHL.
I think the next chip to fall is what happens with Austin Watson. And maybe that's where I get my full reaction, because then I have a clear picture on what the approach is with the overall roster going into opening night. But at face value right now today, I'm very confused, disappointed, unsure of what the plan is next year, because then we're looking at Mazur, Kasper, Danielson, maybe even Lombardi, maybe even Axel Sandin Pellikka. Brandsegg-Nygard. Like, I've got a lot of questions and a lot of confusion today.
Well, here's the thing, and Brad, you alluded to this on Twitter, and we've kind of been saying for a while, the unsexy reality to this is the opening night roster is just that. It's the opening night roster. Kasper cannot be on the opening night roster, and still by the end of the season, we're saying he is a Detroit Red Wing, and he was for effectively the full year, right?
But why are we doing the Simon Edvinsson thing all over again? This is a team that believes that they should have playoff aspirations.
Here's what I think, though. I think they liked what they saw from Austin Watson, and I think they see what's happening across the Atlantic. You look at, Montreal and Xhekaj. You look at Ottawa and the way Ottawa has kind of dummied Detroit physically for far too many games now, or a lot of them at least. They don't want to be out there with nothing. And yes, they have big physical guys who can hold their own, but they're not the same kind of archetype. And so Austin Watson, what is he?
You're not going to sell me on this, but I appreciate your attempt.
No, but like this is the thinking. I agree. I would have preferred to have seen him on opening night, but the reason I'm not like that reactionary or that upset about it is because I do think he's going to be up sooner rather than later on the first injury, or maybe they're making a deal that it just is going to take some time, like Brad said. But Austin Watson doesn't occupy the spot Marco Kasper would have occupied. I do think a Watson deal is coming. I think he's going to be a 13th forward type who steps in and offers some support and physicality, so you're no longer worrying as much about the Kanes and the Larkins and the Raymonds and even Seider getting in that mix when you know Atlantic foes are going to be trying to get you in that game. I think the player occupying Marco Kasper's spot is Berggren. Did Berggren show better than Kasper in the offseason? Not even close. I think Kasper was head and shoulders better than Berggren. But maybe the team's looking at Berggren and saying, hey, you got a raw ride last year and it was a much tougher road to make this team than you would have had elsewhere. We're going to give you an honest chance. Maybe they're waiting to make a move later on, or maybe they're trying to sneak him through waivers later. I don't know exactly what it is, but I think the Kasper spot is Berggren, not Watson. And that's why I'm kind of like, well, the first kind of...
We already have 4 Watsons, though.
No, you don't, though. Who?
Well, anyone in the bottom...
None of them are those physical. I think Watson played well. I have no problem with Watson, objectively speaking, being the 13th forward. I could do without the contract. It's immaterial to me. But you wouldn't want Kasper as the 13th forward, right? If he was up?
Well, I'm shifting out Tyler Mott or Andrew Kopp, to be honest. His preseason was less than appealing.
Those are guys with established roles in the team. Kopp's is established.
I don't know what to tell you.
For a role.
I've seen his established role. It's not good.
Okay, sorry. I have to jump in here.
I would thought you were going to.
I was letting you guys flesh it out because everything Ryan's saying, I want to be very clear about this, is exactly what I think the organization is thinking. I think Ryan's spot on with the thinking.
Clipping that.
You get your gold. You get the gold star of this episode.
No, and I'm glad Ryan prefaced it by saying that's not what he would personally do, because he's objectively right in saying that as well. The organization, what they're thinking here is correct. They have been pushed around for a long time, and we have been sitting here, and we got to be clear, because we cannot be hypocrites about this. We have been bitching and moaning about the Red Wings failing the punk test for years and years and years, and they need to push back. And this is nothing against Austin Watson. He had a perfectly good NHL training camp in preseason that should earn him an NHL contract. Full stop. He was good. And he does provide that element. But what this conversation ultimately boils down to is you're kicking a prospect down the road who objectively has a much bigger impact on the future of this organization. And you're sacrificing that for short-term advantage in the enforcer role. Like, that is archaic thinking. And I understand, again, Ryan's right about everybody has their designated role. How is a team that missed the playoffs that year this predictable on opening night lineup? Everybody on this team, let's be clear before we get really into the weeds. You have your top 6 forwards, Larkin, Raymond, DeBrincat, Compher, Kane, Tarasenko. Those are your top 6. Every single player on this team below that in the forward group is replaceable. Yeah, the Rasmussen, Kopp, Fisher line shows well as a shutdown line. I agree. They're doing their thing well. Don't tinker with it. Could a Veleno or a Mott plug in for any one of those guys and that line be pretty close to just as effective? Yes, absolutely they could. So I don't know why we talk about it like there is no tinkering with it. Again, I like what they're doing. I wouldn't tinker with it right now. But that last line of Mott, Veleno, Berggren, replaceable. Kasper can slot in for any one of those 3. Watson can slot in for any one of those 3. Here's the difference. Kasper was better than all of them, including Watson. So if your primary objective, your short-term goal is we're making this decision for this season and we want to make the playoffs, okay, Kasper should be on the team. You can also have Watson on that team. You healthy scratch Berggren, Mott, Veleno, nobody's batting an eye. And I'm not saying any of those guys deserved it either, but you have 14 NHL caliber forwards right now. Some guys are going to have to sit in the press box before anybody gets...
So move a goalie then?
Move a goalie. They did the right thing sending Holl down. Whatever it has to be. Now, the long-term part of this, and again, I'm not going to panic yet because...
Yeah, you have to offer that qualification.
Yeah, I'm not panicking yet because my deadline that I set weeks ago when we were having conversations about this possibility is Halloween. Okay? If we do not have a Kasper, Mazur, or Danielson up by Halloween, I'm going to start getting upset. It could be as an injury replacement. It could be because a player's underperforming. I don't care. One of them has to be up because the great part of this conversation is all 3 of those specifically are very, 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 very close to being NHL ready, if not NHL ready at this moment. And we know Kasper is. Which tells me after another year in the AHL, All three of them are definitely NHL ready next summer. And are you bringing 3 rookies up when your goal is to make the playoffs? No, we have went over this time and time again. You have to stagger them. It's one of the main reasons we're also upset Edvinsson didn't make it last year. This team is going into their 3rd season of quote-unquote hitting the gas out of the rebuild. 1 rookie has played for the team a regular shift since then, and it's Simon Edvinsson. 0 forwards. Kasper has to play a majority of the games this season. 50, 60, 70, whatever. Anything in that range is perfectly fine. If the Red Wings are sitting here at the end of October and they're 2nd or 3rd in the Atlantic and they're winning a lot of games and it's going really well and you're sitting here going, we can't tinker with this lineup, perfectly understandable. Let the hot hand ride. Sorry, Marco, you got to keep playing in the AHL. A-okay. If this team's 500 or below or flirting around that 9, 10, 11 spot at the end of October, okay, you have to bring them up.
We'll have some great episodes.
Yeah, because again, I am not going to sit here and dump on anybody individually based on their preseason performance. Watson looked good for a bottom line role. Veleno looked fine. Mott looked fine. All these guys look like they can fill that role in a perfectly capable way. None of them, absolutely 0 of them, have any impact on the long-term success of the Detroit Red Wings. Marco Kasper does. So my whole thing, this boils down to it, why I'm annoyed right now. Annoyed, not angry, again, because of the deadline, is if your goal is short-term success, Marco Kasper is a top 12 forward on this team all day, every day. There's no argument around it. If your ultimate goal is the long-term future, okay, well, you need to start integrating the young guys into the lineup, so Marco Kasper should be in the lineup. There's no good justification to have him not on the roster Thursday night. Again, it's not the end of the world if he's not. Go let him heat up in the AHL, bring him up in a month or 2. I'm okay with that. But this justification that Ryan alluded to, which I think he's right about they need someone to go punch people in the face and be able to play a shift. Austin Watson does that. But if that's at the expense of Marco Kasper and that's the thinking they have here, that's archaic thinking. That is not how you push this franchise forward. That is not how you push this team to a playoff spot.
Well, the one part of that I'll disagree on is I think there is a good justification, and it's if you're trying to make a move, whether it be with a goalie or Berggren or whoever else, and it's unfortunate, but Kasper makes sense because he is waiver exempt, and you send him down until you can figure that out, or until the injury happens, because you're like, it hurts because Kasper was so good, but we don't want to lose Berggren for nothing. We don't want to lose Johansson for nothing. We know an injury is going to come, and we see Watson as holding an entirely separate spot, which I know which is where you disagree on.
Yeah.
But that we view that bucket as completely immaterial to the Kasper conversation. And just when the first injury comes, he'll be up, and 69, 72 games is the same thing practically as 82, and in the end will be better for it because we won't have lost Berggren for nothing,
Yeah, I agree fully because there's lots of time. And again, that's why I keep parroting the Halloween, because over the first month of the season, say Igor Shesterkin gets hurt for the Rangers. Oh, all of a sudden now your 3 goalies have some value. You can trade a goalie needy team, one of the guys. There's Kasper's spot. Oh no, Tyler Mott went into the boards funny. He's out. There's Kasper's spot. There's options here. But in the short term, too, part of me goes, well, you just don't sign Watson, or you sign him and waive him and send him, which could be the thinking here where they are going to sign him and waive him, and then they're going to bring Kasper back up. And like you said, they might think if we waive him on Wednesday, maybe we got a better odds of getting him through, et cetera, et cetera. It could be something like that, hence why I'm not hitting the panic button today. But if everything plays out as we're theorizing right now, even though I understand the justification, I got to say I still don't love it just because of all the implications around it. And again, if we're sitting here on October 23rd and Kasper's playing a regular shift because someone went down or they waived, sure, it's fine. But it still just rubs me the wrong way. Like, it just kind of, the best way I can describe it is it gives me Ken Holland era vibes where yet again, they're making decisions in the short term, even though the decisions should be made at the long-term view. And it's the rookie, the young guy, that's taking the hit for it.
You know what my arbitrary deadline is? Winged Wheel Podcast Night on November 9th. I want him up for that game.
Yeah.
I want to see him there. I know there's the justification for this, and I'm annoyed that the justification for this exists because it's boring. It's going to seem like overly diplomatic, and it's like, well, he can be up soon, blah, blah, blah. The risk to that is we see Simon Edvinsson again, which you said fairly, but I do think that's the answer. Because, yeah, the passionate part of me, the part that likes the feel of a young kid making the opening night roster and the excitement of that and the statement of that, yeah, I would have loved to have seen him there. I know in the end, if he comes up after whatever, 5, 12 games, whatever it is, in the end, it will accomplish all the same things of you're taking a long-term view, as Brad said, and you're finally doing a little bit of staggering of the rookie integration, as Brad said. But you still want, it would have been nice. It's just how things go, and especially with the Red Wings, but that's where the annoyance comes in. Just to put it out there, and again, this isn't a knock on Austin Watson. He's just someone who is there to get in the mix. He's not going to go out there and pummel guys. I don't think he wins a lot of fights, but he's just the guy who's in the fights. You'd prefer him over Seider. Okay, I'm going to move this along because I think, our Red Wings season preview is Wednesday, and there's going to be a lot more on this and the other guys. But just to talk about the other players who were sent down, the fact that we haven't raised it yet lends to the theory and the opinion that it wasn't too much of a surprise, but just to put a little detail to it, Danielson, Mazur, Hannes, Soderblom, Tuomisto, Wollander, Viro, Dello, Kosa, Geilander, Brandsegg-Nygard over to Sweden. The only two who are really otherwise in the mix are Danielson and Mazur, and I think they had high points at various points in the preseason, but as the preseason went on for months and months and months and months and months, Kasper had a separation, and the more you saw from Danielson and Mazur, and I think especially Danielson, you were like, yeah, a year in the AHL will do him really, really well, and he'll be ready pretty soon.
Yeah, they both look good. I think Mazur needs to get a step quicker. Danielson just needs to get acclimated to the pace because he still made a lot of, really good plays that a lot of guys in this organization can't. And if he was on the opening night lineup, I wouldn't have been shocked with how he played. Like, he was fine, but it wasn't quite to the same extreme that he had last year. So I'm A-okay with him going down and, hopefully dominating the AHL for a year. Mazur getting a little more seasoning and maybe getting a little more explosiveness to his game. It's fine. Like I said, my whole thing was one of the three needs to be playing a bulk of this season. And right now it looks like Kasper should be that guy.
Otherwise, the preseason kind of ended. I think everyone was just burnt out by the end. There was the exciting game against Ottawa where eventually they lost in overtime. They blew the lead, but Watson had that. He was tossed. It was the whole 7-minute penalty thing. I think the reason they tossed him was, one, they saw what happened elsewhere in all the Atlantic Division bloodbaths for whatever reason, and they just didn't want that happening more. And I think Watson not letting go of the guy and like pulling him again and pulled the refs down, I think they just didn't like that, and that's why they tossed him. And then Kasper's 2 goals and all that. So that was how the preseason ended. Some other quick notes in Red Wings news. Jack Campbell, goaltender who is poised to be in the AHL, entered the NHL Player Assistance Program and is going to be in there until he's cleared to return to play in regular duties. So as we've seen in the Red Wings organization recently, all you can do is wish the player and the person the best. Insensitive. I got the question a few times. Does this affect anything for Detroit practically in terms of roster or the cap? And the answer is no. So that is the Red Wings news. Oh, also very quickly, Emmett Finney named captain in Kamloops, which was cool to see. So again, made a name for himself as a late round pick we talked about recently, but named captain. And that's yet another captain prospect in the Red Wings organization. So good for him. Okay. Why don't we jump into our interview with Steve Dangle of the Steve Dangle podcast and SDPN. Our conversation where we talked about the Red Wings, the Leafs, the Atlantic, and lots more. Enjoy this conversation with Steve Dangle. See you on the other side. Steve Dangle, twice a father, now twice an author, and way too long since we've had you on. How you doing, man?
Good. I can't decide which one's harder. Writing a book's pretty hard. I think I'm going to say writing a book, actually.
Why didn't you do what the rest of us do, which is just have someone ghostwrite it?
I'm stupid. I'm like really dumb. Like, you know what was really dumb is planning it so that my second child arrived at the same time that my second book was due, which also happened to be right before the playoffs. and also trade deadline, and I'm okay now. But that was a tough spring. That was tough.
Bless your wife, man. Steve Dangle, the Steve Dangle podcast, SDPN. We talk a lot about the Red Wings having a big season coming up. The Leafs, by God, are going to have the leafiest season coming up. So Steve's here to talk to us about the Atlantic Division, his thoughts on the Red Wings as a shadow Red Wings fan. I won't have anyone forget that. Yeah. And the Leafs, because we're all following the drama with Mitch Marner and more. Let's start with that, actually, Steve. I'm not going to do the whole line A, pair A thing, because I think there's only so much I can talk about a preseason game before my head explodes. Yeah. Mitch Marner is the topic of the year. I will be transparent with you. I know you're an avid Winged Wheel podcast listener, but I say a lot. I hope Mitch Marner just goes all the way to free agency, because I think that's objectively the funniest thing. But what's the read that you have in Leafs world, and what's the pulse over there?
I mean, I tend to go with whatever CJ says. Chris Johnston of the Chris Johnston Show, CJ Show on SDPN, and he seems to be leaning towards Marner staying. They're going to sign him to an extension. The extension is going to be more than he already makes. No one's going to be happy about that, but he'll be a Leaf for his whole career. Like you gotta understand, Leaf fans have an incredibly complicated relationship with this current team. Like unprecedented regular season success. So many guys are like, it's not inconceivable that Matthews, Marner, Nylander end up like 1, 2, 3 in scoring all time for the franchise. And they have done nothing, not a single thing in the playoffs. And it's led a large chunk of the fan base, even me at sometimes, to resent some of the best players to ever play for the organization. So Matthews has his big deal. He's going to be the highest paid player in the NHL this year by cap hit. William Nylander's up to $11.5 million after playing really well last year. And, Mitch Marner might pass him. Like no one, Mitch Marner's the only 100-point player in this league who has never scored 100 points. But I think, I 100% think he could pass in a contract year with a team that should be good this regular season. I think he could pass Doug Gilmour's single season record for points for the Leafs, which is 127. It's very, very high, but his last contract year was cracked. Like he was so good. Ask me on a non-game day how I feel about this group, and I'm pessimistic because I'm thinking too much about the future. Ask me on a game day what I think about this group, and I think they're great because we're heading into tonight's game. It's just really complicated.
There is the leafiest leafisms I've ever heard in there. The Maple Leafs fans have an extraordinarily complicated relationship with the team. I started cracking up, and then Marner being the only 100-point player who hasn't scored 100 points. When you can hear the echoes of like hundreds of podcasts pass and beating this topic to death. Still, it's curious to me to hear the optimism that, and not that I'm doubting CJ, because I also just go by really what CJ says in the Toronto space. He's, at the top of the game, but that seems like a really complicated relationship between the player and his camp. We all know what we mean by that, and the team. And you're looking at the negotiations right now between Swayman and Boston, and that's a tenuous one because, they went through arbitration and they've given him leverage, but they still want to act like they didn't. And you're seeing more and more of that in the NHL. And so I think, Marner didn't go through the arbitration process, but that's not been a healthy relationship at times. So why the optimism, and why should fans of teams like, say, not randomly, the Detroit Red Wings not think they have a chance to sign Mitch Marner in free agency?
Well, like he's basically laid it out. Like I think if they could have traded him, they would have. But he's got the full no move, and he didn't want to go, and that's his right. And he grew up cheering for this team, and people don't really look at it this way. But a player who breaks my heart, like when I just think about what they were and how things are, Matt Duchene. Like that guy grew up loving the Colorado Avalanche. Loved it. Knew what Peter Forsberg and Joe Sakic, knew their stick curves, knew the brand, knew everything. Loved that team. And then imagine like your childhood idol trades you and you got that photo of you all miserable. So I think back to that and it's heartbreaking. I'm glad you brought up Swayman because, yeah, every time Marner steps in front of a microphone, it looks like it's actively poisoning him. Like it looks like it causes him physical pain. But as far as the contract stuff goes, because that's done not in front of a microphone, they're really doing it the right way. In 2019, and I don't expect anyone outside of the Leafs fan base to remember this one, but Austin Matthews signs a 5-year extension. The day he signs it, Marner's agent is in the newspaper talking about how that deal is brutal for the Leafs. It's great for the player because Matthews got this. Marner's ass just went up and it dragged out all summer and a little bit into camp. And it stripped Marner, this happy-go-lucky Care Bear, of a lot of his baby fat, that whole ordeal. Some people still see him as that, but a lot of people were like, you know what, I'm enough of this kid. It was the first real blemish. 2018 series, I think it was, against the Boston Bruins. He had a heroic performance in Game 6 to force Game 7. No one remembers or talks about it, and now he's got this reputation as a playoff choker. So, there's that. This year, it's, nope, we're not talking about that right now. My agent's going to handle it. And the Leafs said, yep, we're talking, and we're going to handle it. You look at what the Bruins are doing. Like, the Bruins, for very understandable reasons, I look at the Bruins as a standard bearer. No one does identity like the Boston Bruins. They sign Boston Bruins. They draft Boston Bruins. They develop Boston Bruins. They don't just go out and get random guys. Anyone they get is either already a Bruin before they're a Bruin or they quickly become one. To go out of your way to fight with your starting goalie after trading one of his best friends who you probably shouldn't have because he could have been your backup plan in negotiation. Like, I'm just watching them make mistake after mistake after mistake, and not just stuff I wouldn't have done, like tasteless mistakes. Like, it's great theater. It's great cinema. That's not how you conduct business. Not at all. So I don't know if I did a great job answering your question, but the Leafs and Marner's camp, because I think the mistakes in 2019 largely fell on Marner and his representation. The mistakes of 2019 are not being replicated in 2024 yet.
The only thing we're missing from the Swayman saga is an Alan Walsh style, artistic depiction of the betrayal of Jeremy Swayman. And I think you should tell Alan that he should lend his services over to the agent of Jeremy Swayman, because that would have been a lot of fun to see.
We should call Louis Gross, see if he wants to do a podcast.
Yeah, maybe we get him on the Winged Wheel Network, and then we have a kind of mono thing. Okay, so I'm not going to do more than this many minutes on Marner because I need my Christmas cards to not be returned to sender around the holiday time. So let's jump into the Leafs as a whole, your thoughts on the Atlantic, and then your thoughts on the Red Wings. But first with the Leafs, the outside perspective looking in is, Tree Living has come in, and it seems to be dialed back to the pre-Dubas era of same old Leafs making some strange decisions, but they still have top-end players. Obviously, you're not going to just describe away Matthews, Marner, Nylander, etc. So how much optimism is there in terms of the Leafs being able to shake the regular season performers, playoff chokers, label they have very justifiably?
This is the problem they have almost every October. We had a live event, St. Catharines, Ontario, and we're like, what do you think about the Leafs this year? It was the quietest, most reserved reaction we've heard in a long time. Losing sight of the fact that, these guys might screw around and win the division. They're not a bad regular season team. That's never been the criticism. you can almost guarantee that the games they do lose will be in the most humiliating fashion, but they should win a ton of games this year. In net, you go from Samsonov, who for 3 months of last season was the worst goaltender in the NHL. You have, and you replace him with Anthony Stolarz, who is one of the best, at very least, backup goalies. On the back end, you have Chris Tanev. Ignore the 6-year contract, because, yeah, that's wild. Like, let's call it what it is. It's wild. He's the best right-handed defenseman the Leafs have had in 20, 30 years. Like, it's actually crazy. If you go and look through the list, you might be like, Chris Tanev, really? Yeah, yes, really. Number 2 might be Pavel Kabina. Like, it's not great. I know. No wonder they haven't really gotten very far. And then you have Ekman Larsson. Like, their decor is better than it was last year. Up front is where it's tricky, because you got to rely on a few things. They lose Tyler Bertuzzi, and you know how much that stinks. And they didn't replace him. And if they are replacing him, it's with Max Pacioretty, which there's no guarantees there at all. You're basically hoping the young guys get a little better. But Marner hopefully is better than he was last season, contract year. Okay. Nylander, it'll be hard to be better than he was last season because that was his contract year. And then if you didn't add to your forward group and you're hoping for improvement from within, Austin Matthews scored 69 goals. If he drops down to 50 might still win him the Rocket. That's 19 goals you have to make up, not including the 21 that you're losing from Tyler Bertuzzi. So all of a sudden we're up to 40 goals you got to make up. So I by and large think they're a better team than they were last year. I have them finishing second in the Atlantic. They could win the division, compete for the President's Trophy maybe. They're a really good team. Again, every October, we struggle with the fact that it's not April. It's difficult to evaluate.
I am very guilty of saying being greater than the sum of their parts. And I look at coaches who can get teams to be greater than the sum of their parts. And I always point to Barry Trotz and what he did on Long Island. And from the moment Craig Berube was fired, I thought that guy will be a Toronto Maple Leaf head coach, and there's going to be a bunch of BS in the way between now and then, but it's going to happen. I feel like everyone saw it a million miles away. And when Toronto brought him in, I thought, this feels like the meat and potatoes obvious move that almost annoys you that it's going to work. But I get the sense that Craig Berube will be able to get this team to be greater than the sum of their parts, which do add up to a lot.
That would be pretty cool if he were able to do that. Like, I think he'll have them playing a little more north-south. They'll be grinding teams more. They'll be working hard. And you know what's funny? Like, because he was an enforcer, I think a lot of people think he's like pro enforcer and he's going to use Ryan Reeves and he's going to overuse him. If you go and look at his Blues teams, he didn't really do that. And his Blues teams, you know, we remember the Cup win, obviously. They were really good in the regular season. Like, the run, if I'm not mistaken, from the video I made when he was hired, the run the Blues went on the season he was hired to go from last place to playoff team, if I'm not mistaken, that wasn't even the best win percentage or points percentage in the standings of his regular season tenure with the Blues. Like, this is a really good regular season coach. One of the problems, though, and you're going to see this in the Amazon documentary that's coming out, and I can't spoil it because if you went to the event and you saw it early, you're embargoed and all that, but Sheldon Keefe knew exactly what was wrong with the Toronto Maple Leafs and begged them to score goals a certain way, and they wouldn't do it. You can trace it all the way back to the Habs series. Not even the Habs series. The whole Canada bubble season, he begged these guys, even when they were running through the division, finishing first place. He's like, you guys, you have to go to the net. You have to go to the net. You have to score playoff-style goals. And then they didn't do it. Then they blew it. And here we are 3 years later, and let's just say in the Amazon documentary, you're going to see him request something very similar. And they made like, Jeremy Swayman's a great goalie. They made him look like a god, like an unbeatable god. And it's because they wouldn't go to the net.
4D chess, because now they're going to get him a contract that's maybe too rich for his blood and Boston's blood. And then this is the whole thing turned around. I think Brad Marchand. Take that, Brad Marchand.
Big brain.
All right, Steve, I'm going to flip you to your real favorite team, the Detroit Red Wings. You know, a lot is made of Steve Yzerman and the Yzer plan, and he hates that phrase. But from your perspective looking in, an Atlantic Division rival's perspective looking in, where do you see the Red Wings in terms of their hopes of, you know, being a wild card competitor again this year and their long-term trajectory? Is there the pessimism of, hey, it hasn't happened yet, what's the wait? He's been here since 2019, or do you see them on the right path?
They're on the right path. Like, I hate when people look at the Leafs playoff struggles, for example, and they go, well, the Atlantic's a really good division. And then you sit back in October and I'm trying to place Detroit, and it is. Like, I would argue the Line A injury complicates things, but I would argue there's not a single bad team in the Atlantic Division. It doesn't always end up that way. Sometimes a team gets a bunch of injuries and, you know, one loss becomes 10 and stuff like that. But like, the Red Wings could conceivably make the playoffs, 100%. So could the Sens. Less convinced about Buffalo. But it's becoming less of a division of haves and have-nots. I still kind of see it separated as 4 and 4. The top teams are Florida, Toronto, Boston, and Tampa. Can Tampa cling on to that? There's a lot of turnover there. Florida, they're probably not going to prioritize the regular season, and even if they did, would they be too fatigued? Boston, who the hell's in net? And the Leafs are the friggin' Leafs, and they're the ultimate wild card. So there could be also 5 Atlantic teams in the playoffs getting both wild card positions. It's definitely possible. Red Wings aren't bad. Are they good? The goaltending to me is a huge question. It's like Yzerman forgot that you can't put all 5 guys in the net at the same time. Although it'd be a pretty interesting strategy. It'd be a good strategy. You know, there's some defensemen some days where I'm like, we're better off without you, Justin Holl. There it is. Yeah. No, like I don't understand what the plan is there. Like, for this season. And like, Yzerman seems to be the king of, okay, I understand what this is going forward. I don't understand what it is now. Like, Sebastian Cossa, that's the plan going forward, I assume. That's why you go out and you get a geriatric Cam Talbot, you know, coming off a all-star appearance. Is it going to be Talbot Husso? Like, that could be pretty good. But then you also got Lyon and Jack Campbell for some reason. And like, there's a lot there. I don't understand exactly what's going on. I can tell you this. I thought the Lucas Raymond deal that's about what it should have been. Mo Seider is like, I said it on the podcast. Okay, yeah, he didn't get that 8th year, whatever. There's no justification for Mo Seider making less than Charlie McAvoy. There's none. Like, McAvoy signed that deal years ago. Mo Seider, in 3 seasons to start his NHL career, has not missed a game. He kills people. He scores goals and assists at a very high rate. He's stapled to the Rock of Triumph in Ben Sherratt, old Simpsons reference. Like, I don't know how you got Seider at that number. And I look at that and I go, okay, are the Red Wings going to be stellar and make the playoffs this year? I don't know. But they're going to go on playoff runs over the life of that Seider contract. and he's going to look damn good when he does it. It's such a good number.
For anyone who was upset that, Dangle is on the show today, because I always see comments of like, oh, this is the yelly guy. Listen to what he just said. He better have just won over your hearts and minds. Steve, I know we're short for time, so for the goalie conversation, we'll save that for when you invite us on the show, and we'll explain the whole the goalie plan. But very quickly, your Atlantic Division standing predictions, whichever order you want to go.
We're recording our season previews right now. I should have brought my book. I think Florida first. It's a little risky. Toronto second. They've shown a reluctance to actually be able to win the thing. I think Tampa third. I see them being a little better. Boston screws everything up. But ultimately, I think they're a strong enough team that they're fourth. Then there's fifth, which I think this is where you're like, all right, where does Detroit fit in all this? I would rather Detroit be here, but I have Ottawa finishing fifth. Ullmark really ties the room together. So many things went wrong for Ottawa last year, and I don't quite see that happening again. Detroit's in sixth, like neck and neck. They're going to be right there. They're going to be playing meaningful games in March and maybe even April. They might even make it. Like, I won't even be shocked. They almost made it this past year. And this year's team is probably better. Buffalo is a really confusing one, but they're probably still too young and too early in what they're trying to do. So I have them seventh. And then Montreal, pre-Line A, I don't know if I put them here, but eighth. And also there's no pressure for them to win right now.
All right, that is Steve Dangles. I extracted that out of him. I think I just stole content, so sorry for that. Steve, appreciate it, man. One last thing I'll leave you with. Evan Lopsinger on our show is dead set on having a charity boxing match between our two shows. I personally, it's my MO. I don't fight fathers. They have too much to live for and also at the same time nothing to lose. But I'll leave it between Evan and Jesse to hammer that out, and you and Brad can go at it, and me and Adam will cheer from the sidelines. I think that's how we do it. Steve Dangle, the Steve Dangle Podcast, SDPN. Thank you so much for jumping on, Steve.
Thank you.
This episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast is proudly brought to you by Labatt Blue Light. Created in 1983, this premium light Canadian Pilsner is a delicately balanced beer brewed with Cascade hops and a blend of malt. It's fresh, crisp, and brewed to the highest quality standards. There's a little bit of Canadian kindness in every sip of Labatt Blue Light. How did it get in there? They're Canadian. That's how. You can spread the love yourself by sharing a Labatt. And when you do share a Labatt, you're not just sharing a beer. You're sharing an experience that'll pair with anything from hockey to a hoedown. So next time you're watching hockey with your buds, be sure to share a Labatt, because while you might not all root for the same team, although we on this podcast do hope you're rooting for Detroit, you can all enjoy a Labatt Blue Light. We honestly love going to games in Detroit and seeing Labatt being the beer that fans clamor for all over the arena. It's a reliable beer, and it's great to have in your hand when celebrating a goal. So head to the link in the description of this episode or the one you see on your screen to find Labatt in stores near you today. You must be 21 or older, and as always, enjoy responsibly. It goes to show how good of a friend I am. We had Steve on the show. I even mentioned the fact that he was now twice an author. I didn't even ask him to talk about his new book, Hockey Rants and Raves by Steve Dangle Glynn. New book. Putting the link in the description. I'm a terrible friend. Sorry, Steve. Go check it out. Okay. Our Atlantic Division preview. It is not the Detroit Red Wings preview. We have a whole episode, one of our biggest episodes of the year, every year, coming out on Wednesday night. That is coming your way, but this is just an Atlantic Division preview. Same template as our other three division previews. Yes, we're still going to talk about the Red Wings, but just not as in-depth as Wednesday. Why don't we start, and let's start with the bottom of the order from last season, based on standings, the Montreal Canadiens. What are they going to do? Is this going to be any kind of a better year for them? Do the injuries to Reinbacher and Laine change the formula for them at all? Or is this another tanky season for the Habs?
Well, having Laine and Reinbacher could have changed the course of their season. Without them, I think it's going to be more of the same. Now, the advantage they have is their roster is very young. So a lot of those guys will be Obviously, another year older, another year more experienced, which means they're going to be another year better. So I don't expect them to be the doormat they were last year. And I shouldn't say doormat. They were competitive. They just didn't win a ton of games. Like, hell, look at what they put Detroit through in the last 2 games of the year. Took an overtime game and a shootout to get those 2 wins in the last 2 games of the season just to have a playoff hope against Montreal, who had nothing to play for. So I think they're going to be that, plucky underdog who's really scrappy. They are in almost every game they're in, but ultimately don't come away with a lot of wins because they just don't have the horses to do it. That being said, they still have Caufield, Slafkovsky, Suzuki. I'm not saying they're going to make a playoffs, but I think they're more of a danger to pass a Detroit, an Ottawa, a Buffalo than people are giving them credit for. I don't think they're going to, but it's not all that out there to think it could happen.
I'm sort of on the same boat as Brad. I don't think the gap between Montreal and then the Detroit, Buffalo, Ottawa melee is all that far. And I'm super interested to see what Lane Hudson can do this year because he looks like he could be a defensive star in the NHL at some point. So really, it's been bad luck for Montreal already to start the season, losing Reinbacher and Laine. I thought with maybe those 2 in the lineup, there could be a real conversation for them to not be the last place team in this division. But here we are. I really don't believe in their goaltending. I don't think Sam Montembeault is really the answer there, or Caden Primo as well. So
Montembeault was great last year.
Sustained, though, you think?
Oh, that's the question. If it is sustained, that completely changes Montreal's outlook, but he was really good last year.
I think Montreal has a lot there to say in the future they're going to be around and they have a good enough core where you can't count them out as one of those destitute organizations that has absolutely nothing going for them. I don't really think the Atlantic has that. Their bad teams on paper should at least be a little bit better, or you can see how they could be. And Montreal fits that MO. I agree with Evan, though. I have my questions about how much they're going to be able to sustain that went well for them last season. The injury to Laine, it apparently is not as bad as it could have been. And if he's back in a couple months and he can find his form, then that might change the formula. But that's a big if. Laine's been off the ice for various reasons. It's until you see him back out there and in a groove and fitting into that system, you can't count on that. So to me, this is with a promising look to the future, a scrappy 7th, 8th in the division Montreal Canadiens. Best case scenario I see is 6th. I could be wrong. I don't think it's impossible, but they need some killer performances. Like you said, Evan, I think Lane Hudson would have to be up there and they'd need another strong season in net. So yeah, the Habs their fans are happy and for, I think, good reason, but I don't think this year is where they're going to move way up the order. Team that is better on paper than they are on the ice historically over the past little while, the Ottawa Senators up next. Do they finally move up the order this year? Does Ullmark change that for them? What are they going to do?
Their prospect system is depleted. Everybody is graduated. If they don't do it this year, that organization needs to start panicking in a bad way. At least us as Red Wings fans, even with the multiple disappointments, all the guys outside of Raymond and Seider and Larkin and Edvinsson that are going to save this team long-term aren't in Detroit yet. Ottawa can't say that. They're all there. There's not much waiting in the wings. Well, the way they've been playing, weeds might be more apt. But they're the wild card. Here's the crazy part. I was listening to something Jesse Granger was talking about, and he's a big goalie guy, and he follows the league's goaltending really closely. Everybody's been saying Ullmark is a great goalie, but how's he going to do when he gets to Ottawa? Is he going to dip because the team in front of him is weaker? The underlying analytics of shot prevention were actually better for Ottawa last year than Boston.
Yeah, people think Boston made their goalies good, but I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, at worst, it's a wash right now, which for me as a Red Wings fan does make me a little nervous with Ottawa because that was their biggest weak spot by a mile last year was goaltending. I don't love their roster, but they should be doing better than they have been. If Ullmark can provide some stability, although it might only be for 1 year, That's a huge boost for them just to even get them into the playoffs for a year and get that confidence and get that experience. It could go a long way. That being said, their right side of the D is atrocious. Yeah, Zub and Jensen aren't terrible, but they don't exactly inspire confidence. The depth at forward leaves a lot to be desired, but if Stützle bounces back, if Batherson continues to do what he can do, if Brady Tkachuk repeats what he did last year,
Josh Norris stays healthy.
Yeah, Claude Giroux continues to beat Father Time. Like, there's a lot to like about that team, but they are that team that people have been saying exactly this about for years now, and they just don't put it together for whatever reason. So it's hard to bet against them looking at it on paper, but it's very easy to bet against them looking at the recent history.
This is definitely a watershed year for Ottawa. They've had all their guys mostly graduate at this point. I don't know what hot off the press information is on Carter Yakimchuk, but he could be part of the solution to their defense on the right-hand side. You know, they still have Tim Stützle. They still have Brady Tkachuk, who seems to just drag his team into the fight, both figuratively and literally.
Well, only literally when they're down by multiple goals in the third period, but I digress.
Or when they score an open net slap shot against the Toronto Maple Leaf. So I expect Ottawa to be better this year just because they've got another year of seasoning with a lot of their younger players. Ullmark and Forsberg definitely would make me feel confident as an Ottawa fan about their goaltending situation for this year. Yeah, their lineup to me is like, I don't get all warm and fuzzy like I would about, you know, Colorado or Vegas, but I think they could be better than the sum of their parts with this team. So they're right there for me in terms of potentially making the playoffs.
Ullmark is what's going to make me decide whether or not they are above or below Detroit or Buffalo or whoever, because they're all in the same mix there. And I think that's where they're going to live or die. I agree with you guys on the minutia and who up front would have to make a difference. But to me, it's Ullmark is going to decide it for them. Buffalo, another team, and maybe the poster child for why is this team not better because of who they have on paper. Do they finally do it this year? Qualifier, they are already 0-2 to start the season. We might have seen fire Lindy chants again, and he's not even in New Jersey. They were losing to New Jersey this time. I'm kidding.
I feel like everything I said about Ottawa minus Ullmark applies here. On paper, this team looks good. They're young. Almost all their key prospects have graduated, are playing, are another year older and better. There's some depth issues. There's some imbalance on the defense from the left side to the right side. You know, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen's a promising goalie, but obviously he's not Ullmark yet. Funny enough, it's easy to forget that Ullmark came up through the Sabres, but anyways. I have lots of reasons to be optimistic about this team on paper, and I have lots of reasons to be pessimistic based on recent history of this team just not getting it done.
Is the coaching change going to inspire anything? Maybe. Did they do enough to change the formula to, you know, propel them up the standings? I don't know. I've said privately, like, I think Ottawa has all the makings to move it up in the standings, but until I see it, I just can't believe they're actually going to do it. And if I say that about Ottawa, how can I say Buffalo's going to do the same thing? I really like Buffalo's talent. I think their high-end talent has the ability to make them a really, really good team. But at the same time, like, did they do enough in the offseason? Now, if Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen is absolutely stellar this year, then yeah, between him and Levi backing up, that could be the difference maker. Welcome to my division previews where I say that goaltending is going to be the difference in every fringe team. But
it really is.
Genuinely, like, if one of these teams is going to take a step and they didn't go out and make some kind of nuclear shakeup in their team and bring in a superstar, that growth from within is going to have to come from the goaltending. Buffalo is still in that tier of the Ottawa, the Detroit, maybe the Montreal. You can't convince me they're in the top half of the division until they are able to translate their talents on paper.
The team that's going to make the playoffs out of those three this year is the ones where the teams take a big step. And I was going to say where the rookies or the young players take a big step, but the Red Wings at this current moment don't have any rookies in the lineup. So we'll forgo that for now. But I think, they bought out Jeff Skinner. That frees up cap space for them, but that also loses them some offense. So this year, the burden and the weight on that team falls even more on your Jack Quinn, your Zach Bensons, your JJ Peterkas. They have to take the next step. And if they don't, they're going to be looking at Montreal more than they're going to be looking at Ottawa and Detroit.
All right, reverse order standings means we're in 5th in the Atlantic last season, which was the Detroit Red Wings at 91 points. Again, the full review, full predictions down to points and stuff is coming on Wednesday's Detroit Red Wings season preview episode. But just based on the same format that we've done, what about the Red Wings?
This is the point in the division where we could say every team we've talked about, up to and including the Red Wings, is interchangeable. I could see any of these 4 teams finishing in any order. I don't think any of them, including Detroit, are at the point where I can predict them ahead of the 4 teams above them. Although I do think Tampa and Boston are more vulnerable than people are talking about. But until they prove they're bad, we're going to assume they're not bad. I don't know. I think for this specific season, I think the Red Wings are right in the fight for 5th. But the big disadvantage they have over the other 3 teams is, like we already alluded to, these other 3 teams are keeping up with them, and they have most of their key prospects on the team already. The Red Wings are struggling to stay afloat with one of the older teams in the league without a Marco Kasper, Nate Danielson, Carter Mazur, Michael Brandsegg-Nygard, in the lineup. It's considering Detroit, Montreal, Ottawa, and Buffalo are all in basically the same spot. The age discrepancy on these teams, I'm not going to say in general, but in key spots, is concerning.
The Red Wings have one key hole that makes me always give pause to the optimistic side of me that wants to say, yeah, they'll be at the top of these 4 and they'll be the first one to challenge, Tampa or Boston or whoever falls out. And that's their defense. I've maintained that, and I don't think that's changed. On defense, they still have questions. You can think the world of, Olli Mata on the third pair. You can think the world of what Gustafsson might do playing on the right side on the third pair and then, on one of the 2 power play units. Obviously, you're going to think the world of Mo Seider, and you can think, yeah, Sherratt's downfalls in that top pair are overblown and he looks fine next to Seider, whatever you want to say. But this defense, unless Simon Edvinsson has a really, really, really strong, effectively rookie season, they are going to struggle the same way they have in the past. Edvinsson, and then if Gustafsson shows up and is really excellent and can provide more in that lineup than we thought, those will be the difference makers. I don't think you can really count on Johansson just from what we saw in the preseason. We'll see how he ramps up over the course of time. But to me, I can see this forward group, even if it has a little bit of a different look with Tarasenko and no Gostisbehere providing points from the back end kind of thing, I can see them still producing really well in the NHL. Same kind of shooting percentage? Maybe not, but I can see them producing enough on offense. Talbot, Lyon, Husso, whatever they end up with, I can see them being better than last year's goaltending trio, but effectively tandem. Absolutely. The defense, I have questions. That's what it comes down to for me. It's not even age. It to me is, I think the area where Detroit has to make moves, whether it's internal growth or in-season moves, is defense.
So here's the part that I've kind of been racking my brain with all summer and when trying to figure out this division. Of the 4 bottom teams in the Atlantic, whose defense group do you like less than Detroit's?
Montreal, maybe.
I think you could maybe make an argument for Montreal.
I think Montreal. Sanderson, Zub, Shabbat, Jensen, Clevin, Bernard, Docker.
Yeah, but what if Carter Yakimchuk is in that lineup?
Is he for this
he looked
season?
Nice in the preseason.
Are you talking this season or
this
future?
Season?
I would imagine he, without knowing opening lineups for Ottawa off the top of my head, he looked really good in the preseason. If they have the same executive team as the Red Wings, maybe they don't.
But even if you look at the top 4 and we just isolate the top 4 between the 2 teams, you're looking at Seider, Sherratt, Petrie, Edvinsson versus Shabbat, Zub, Jensen, Sanderson. I don't think I give Detroit the edge there.
No, it's tough. In Boston, I think no matter what you see in terms of performance, just on the ice, like on this lineup, Byram, Dahlin, Power, Jokiharju.
Bowen, Byram.
Buffalo's, I think, is comfortably better than everybody else's in this four. And going back to the
That's
Ottawa,
what I mean. Like Detroit's their Montreal level.
Now, then this gets to my most concerning point. Of these four teams as well, whose goaltending do you like the least? I would argue pretty comfortably Detroit.
Detroit's got to get it done by committee, I think.
They do. Montembeault, there's the question about sustainability.
Yeah.
But last year, he was comfortably better than all these guys outside of Talbot, but Talbot was in a very goalie-friendly team in LA. Allmark, comfortably better than everybody on Detroit.
But will he be better in Ottawa?
The analytics say should be at least as good.
Well, the anyways.
But either way. And
analytics are only convenient when they're good for my argument.
Buffalo's a bit of a wild card because Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen has shown he can definitely be better than these guys, and Devin Levi is a huge wild card. So they have the benefit of their goalies at worst are probably on par with Detroit's, but they have the advantage of being young. So even if they're not good, it's building to the future. So
for me, but I think goaltending is such a roll of the dice, especially when you're switching the teams. I can't put anyone firmly head and shoulders above the rest until I see what this
I think we
brings.
can put Allmark above everybody else pretty comfortably.
But on Ottawa, for sure. I think you're right. I think that's how it's going to end up, but on Ottawa, for sure.
Just my point being is if Detroit's defense is the worst or the second worst of the group, and if we're ranking the likelihood of where their goaltending is going to rank, it's worst or second worst, statistically speaking.
I think that's when you get too guessy for me. But
No, I know. Well, it's goaltending and it's predictions. We have no choice but to go guessy, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't make me comfortable. I don't. And then I look at the Red Wings forwards, and I think they could go punch for punch, toe to toe with Montreal, Buffalo, Ottawa. But man, once I get below that, I don't like any of their groups individually better than any other team outside of Montreal.
I think there's margin. I think there's margin. You have to see what the teams are going to bring this year. I really do believe the overlap could be big on goalies, but all comes back to, like you just said, it agrees with the first point that I raised. The defense, that's going to be, their team defense is going to be so strong if they're going to succeed, because I don't think it's going to come from the blue line unless Edvinsson is just out of this world and unless Gustafsson just really steps up and is able to shake things up. I think another move has to happen if you want short-term success from the blue line.
Yeah, like I would argue Seider's of this group of four the best defenseman.
Yes.
I don't know if you can.
You make an argument for Dahlin or whatever.
They're in the conversation, but then when you rank the rest of the defensemen in this group behind Seider, unless Edvinsson's a rookie revelation, I think you're rattling off 7 or 8 defensemen before you get to another Red Wing, which is a problem. Like that's the biggest problem the Red Wings will have in this division. They don't have an Owen Power, a Jake Sanderson, even the guys like Jensen and Zub and, Caden Gooley. There's a lot of guys who are comfortably projecting ahead of every other Red Wings defenseman, unless Edvinsson has a Seider-type rookie season.
All right, let's move on.
Defense is boring.
Tampa Bay Lightning. What are they going to do? No Steven Stamkos this year. It's going to be a different look. Are they going to be able to accomplish what they need to accomplish to stay in that top fold? No Stamkos, no Sergachev, Tanner Jeannot, Tyler Mott, all that. But they brought in Jake Gensel, McDonough, again, Cam Atkinson, etc.
Can they beat Father Time still is going to be the question. Their defense is weaker. Vasilevsky didn't have a great year last year. Can he bounce back this year behind a worse defense group? Tampa's power play was elite, and that was mostly because they had that two-headed monster on either side of the flank on the power play. Gensel's great, but he's not playing Stamkos' role. Someone else has to slot in there, and they will not do it nearly as well as Stamkos did, which how does that affect Kucherov? Because what made him absolutely lethal on the right flank was you didn't know if he was just going to rip it or hit his patented one-timer pass across to Stamkos or to point in the bumper. If there's no shooting threat on the other side, it makes it a lot easier to cover point in the bumper. I don't think Tampa's going to be bad, but they are vulnerable. This could be a year where if one of the bottom 4 teams gets hot, they could jump up and maybe keep pace with these guys.
Tampa Bay is my grocery stick of the Atlantic right now. I like in theory what they did with Jake Gensel and Steven Stamkos. I think you're sacrificing a little bit of power play excellence, letting Stamkos go, but you're definitely improving your 5-on-5 production. You're also getting slightly younger, so I can understand that, but you are getting rid of Steven Stamkos, maybe, almost definitely the best Lightning player of all time. So there's going to be some emotional toll taken there as well. Like, there's one big voice no longer in that locker room. Hedman didn't look all that great to me last year either. So if there's any team that's gravitating towards the mayhem that is Ottawa, Detroit, Buffalo, it's Tampa for me.
Vasilevsky could have another down year, but it's Vasilevsky I lean towards he's going to have a strong year. I think these cup competitive perennial contender teams, they have not just a winning culture, which I think matters a lot, but they know how to make the tough decisions so that the real core of their team stays sound, and you build around that. And that means sometimes really important players go, but you replace them with other players who can accomplish that. I really like Jake Gensel. I don't know that they're going to be able to find the same success or the same exact flavor of success that they've had. They are grocery sticky for me, but I don't know necessarily that I'm counting on their downfall quite yet. Moving up the order, the Toronto Maple Leafs. Steve had his thoughts. What are yours?
I think they're better. If they can get a full season out of Joseph Woll and he's competent, Anthony Stolarz was one of the better backups in the NHL for the last few years. So if those guys kind of platoon it, I can see a recipe for success there. Obviously, the contract is hilariously bad, but in the short term, Chris Tanev's a huge upgrade on exactly what they needed on the blue line. They're running back the core 4 forwards, so insert the meme here, but they're still going to score a ton of goals. And I didn't hate the moves they made around the fringes. I don't think they're a cup team, but hey, they're built to be an elite regular season team, and I don't see anything that's going to change that formula.
The OEL contract is obviously a little bit confusing as well, but I think he really did refine his game in Florida last year. So that could be a sneaky good addition. I honestly liked Max Domi towards the tail end of last season as well. I thought he was very complimentary in the bottom 6 for them. I think Toronto is all in all better, and I actually think Craig Berube is one of the biggest additions for them. I think he will motivate their team better than Sheldon Keefe did. He's just got to let those guys, the big guys, go and do their thing. He doesn't need to be X's and O's with those guys. He just has to get them up for games. I think Toronto's one of the best teams in this division.
I agree. I have them as one of the teams contending for the division. I think I had them winning the division last year, the year before. Are they a perfect team? No, but if Wall stays healthy, and all of their questions come postseason, and we know that. That's not a surprise. A team who has one less question, the Boston Bruins, boringly signed Jeremy Swayman to an $8.25 million deal, ruining everyone's fun and ending that stalemate, which means they have their starting goalie to start the year. They saw what Korpisalo was letting in and went, okay, let's just get this thing done. Does Boston finally move down the order, or do they stay up top in the Atlantic?
I think Swayman's a question mark. No preseason, no training camp. He's going to have to ramp up in practice. We remember when Nylander went all the way into November with the Leafs. He was awful that year, and that's a forward.
Yeah, but he doesn't try and doesn't play any defense. It's classic. I'm being sarcastic, by the way.
No.
But,
get him, folks.
But with a goalie, I think there's question marks there. I could see him shaking off a lot of rust and him not getting into form until a good chunk into the season. That being said, this is the Boston Bruins, and they seem to overcome every hurdle they ever have. So he's probably going to pitch a 4-game shutout streak to start the season coming in ice cold, because that's just how things seem to operate in Boston. I think the contracts long-term were atrocious for them, but in the short term, Zadorov and Lindholm are upgrades over what they had last year. They still have Marchand, Pasternak, McAvoy. Again, I am not going to predict the downfall of the Boston Bruins until I see the downfall of the Boston Bruins.
I refuse to be that guy who is the smart guy and says this is the year Boston finally falls off a cliff. because it hasn't happened in the previous 9 years of us doing this, so I'm not doing it now. But I certainly have some questions about what Boston is doing long term. Elias Lindholm was good at one point in his career. I didn't think he was all that great last year. Zadorov might be one of the most overrated defensemen in the NHL. That's an interesting contract to give someone long term.
I think he's a great personality fit in Boston, though.
I absolutely agree. When you put a microphone in front of that guy, the funniest, appropriate, inappropriate things are said, and I love it. I think the NHL needs more of that. But when you go down the lineup, like you're out Allmark, you're out DeBrusk, you're out Kevin Shattenkirk, JVR, Grzelcyk, Derek Forbort, Dan Heinen, like that's a lot of turnover for a team that's built on culture. So we'll see how this season goes, but I'm having long-term questions about where Boston is going.
I appreciate both of you subtly alluding to the fact that both at the start of this podcast 9 years ago, and I think last year, I incorrectly predicted Boston's downfall. So thank you. Yes, I am the idiot. For me, Brad Marchand and his million different operations that he had this year, that's what I'm wondering about. I can't sit here and say other teams who have had a lot of turnover but keep their core together are going to be able to continue their success and not offer Boston this same kind of opportunity. But if Brad Marchand is out for any kind of appreciable amount of time, or if his drop-off is coming soon, then that to me is going to be a question mark for them. And Swayman alone and Swayman and no Allmark, that changes the formula for a goalie. Like you don't have the tandem, you don't have the opportunity to just cool off and ride the hot hand or whatever it is. But I think Swayman is a good goalie who is deserving of the number one job in Boston. But at the same time, yeah, there's going to be pressure and no training camp. So Boston will be one of the better teams still. I see them in that top half, but it's not a surefire thing in my mind. And then finally, the Cup champion Florida Panthers to round us out. What are they going to be able to do? A lot of turnover. If you look at their departures, Brandon Montour, Tarasenko obviously going to Detroit, Ekman Larson, Stolars, Nick Cousin, all of that. Like it's not the same team, but they just won the Cup. Are they going to be able to kind of repeat the success they had?
Barkov, Tkachuk, Verhaeghe, Reinhart, Ekblad, Forsling, Bobrovsky. The pieces they needed to retain are still there. It's one of those things, yeah, losing a guy like Montour, and I'm sure Nick Cousin's super appreciative you threw him in with that group.
Well, personality, like in terms of the pissing off everyone in the NHL and every fan of the league, that teams who have that edge like that edge.
Oh, I should have used Lomberg then because he's in Calgary now.
That's right. Yeah.
The Lamborghini. The core is intact. They're going to be just fine.
The only piece I'm worried about here is Brandon Montour's departure. They brought in Nate Schmidt to try and shelter some of the load there, but you're looking at a guy who played in all situations and was a minute muncher. Like, that's a big hole. But like you guys said, they've got superstars at every single level. And we didn't even mention Matthew Tkachuk, who absolutely is the identity of the Florida Panthers and wills that team into the fight. So these guys are winning the Atlantic, in my opinion.
All right. Your Atlantic Division standings, reverse order, top down, whatever you want to do. What do you have?
All right, let's just get the obvious out of the way. Florida, Toronto, Boston, Tampa.
That is mine as well.
I think that's not obvious, and because I even implied that, it's going to be topsy-turvy, but Tampa and Boston look like the teams that have a lot of question marks, so I'll put them in the 3-4. Obviously, Toronto, great regular season team. Florida's a wagon. No reason to think anything outside of those two doing what they're going to do. The bottom's where it gets tough, because again, I think out of these four teams, any of them can finish in any order of 5 to 8. Unfortunately, I hate defense. And as much as I hate to agree with Ryan on anything, I think defense is going to be kind of what makes or breaks these teams this season. And I'm almost not ranking them solely on that, but based on that. So I'm going to go Ottawa, Buffalo, Detroit, Montreal.
Wow. I
can't look at that Red Wings defense goaltending tandem and compare them to the other three teams and come away with a lot of confidence. Couple that with the bit of the shooting bender the Red Wings were on last year. Anybody here think they're going to finish 9th in goals for again this year?
No, they're going to finish 8th.
All right, well,
But realistically,
you are the defender,
Yeah.
Ryan. You have to rebuttal before me.
I'm not defending that defense score.
Well, you can defend the standing prediction.
basically he has to justify why the Red Wings are going to be a top 10 team in goals for again, because I think I'm with Ryan. They're going to be a bottom 10 defense team again.
I have Toronto winning it. It could very easily be Florida, but to me, I think the Atlantic doesn't have a clear-cut winner, and I'm going to look at Toronto Superstars and say that's going to do it for them. Florida next, Boston. Again, those three are interchangeable in my mind. Tampa Bay after that. I'm going to go Ottawa because of Ullmark. Right behind him, Detroit. Right behind them, Buffalo, and then Montreal.
So I have the same top 4 as Brad. I look at and to steal your words, I look at the superstars of Florida, and I think they get it done and win the division. Then we get to the all-important, the mushy middle of this division, and I have a really tough time picking where it's going to go. I think, like we said, Montreal's a lot closer to that group of 3 than people are alluding to or pretending they're not. For me, this is hard, and I hate the fact that this could get clipped at any moment. I'm going to say Ottawa, Detroit, Buffalo. And I really am not confident in that at all, because I think Buffalo could be poised to move well up and challenge for a playoff spot, or they could be right where they are this year. Detroit's got a lot of questions for me from defense and goaltending, but I think goaltending could get it done as a group. And I think Ottawa, given their improvements in goaltending, another year of NHL experience for their young players, I think they'll finish ahead of the Red Wings.
All right, that's our Atlantic Division preview. We will get into our full Detroit Red Wings season preview with points predictions, player breakdowns, lines, things like that on Wednesday. That is one of our biggest episodes of the year, every year for good reason. But for now, that's our Atlantic Division preview.
For your sake here, I'm going to say that since every single one of us had Detroit dropping in the standings, maybe turn the replies off in all the posts on this episode.
No, but you know what? We're doing this so that we are wrong, and no one's going to take the overly optimistic route and jinx anything and have them move up. And what's going to happen is there's going to be, I think the Red Wings are a move away from taking a step, potentially separating themselves.
I think all 4 of these teams are in that spot.
I think this could be the downfall year of Tampa or Boston for all we know. There's so many question marks outside the top 2 in this division. The Red Wings could get 95 points and no one would be surprised and make the playoffs.
The thing I hate the most about this division and why it's the worst to predict, outside of Florida and Tampa, I am not even a little bit comfortable in predicting what's going to happen with any of their goaltending.
Yes.
No, yeah.
Huge question mark, 6 of the 8 teams.
Ottawa might be the next most certain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're not at all.
Yeah.
If Cam Talbot is Cam Talbot in LA and Detroit has one good goalie between Husso and Lyon, that's, in my mind, that's
a game changer.
That's a wild card contender.
You start talking, are they unseating Tampa or Boston? But
100%. But you can't sit here and reasonably say that's for sure going to happen.
But if Detroit gets a repeat of their goaltending last year and Talbot isn't the LA, now we're wondering, is Montreal going to catch him? There's a wide range of outcomes in this division based on goaltending alone.
All in the air. More on Wednesday. Okay, we are going to jump into Overtime. Overtime is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Again, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast if you want to support the show. Our bonus episodes are bonus off-season and during the season content, the Discord, the ticket giveaways, all of that and lots more. It allows us to do things like produce more great content like Expected by Whom. They have a great new episode out interviewing Elaine Roy, Prashant Iyer, and Sean Shapiro hosting that show. Go check it out. You also allow us to support the Jamie Daniels Foundation through events like Winged Wheel Podcast Night in partnership with the Detroit Red Wings and the Grand Rapids Griffins. Speaking of the Jamie Daniels Foundation, Hot Stove Rounding the Bases with Mike Tirico and guests, Tuesday, January 14th. Go to jamiedanielsfoundation.org to find out more and get your tickets. They'll be on sale soon, Tuesday, January 14th. It is a fantastic event. All of that and lots more, our Patreon supporters are what make all of this happen. Let's jump into some questions from our patrons. MBC says, it seems like Brad often talks about a cup window as a finite period of maybe 3 to 5 years. What is it about the NHL that causes that? Doesn't seem like other pro leagues have quite the same situation.
The salary cap. You have no choice because once your players get old and good, they get expensive. And once you're winning, you're not getting a lot of top prospects because the NHL, for all its flaws, if you look at where all the quality prospects and picks come from, a heavy majority of them are in the top 10. And you're not getting them unless you're bad. So it's a very, very cyclical league. Some teams are really, really good at managing the cap. Their core ages well, and they're able to extend that window to a period of 10 years. Look at Tampa right now, for example. Look at Washington by the time they won their cup. Like, they had been hanging around the top for a while. Pittsburgh's another good example before they started dropping off in recent years. But for the most part, yeah, you get good, then you get expensive, and you're expensive and good, and then you're expensive and old. So that's typically the cycle.
And there's exceptions to every rule, but that's why people talk about those windows. And I think another thing is it really can't be emphasized enough how different it is between, say, the NFL, where a first-round pick can be an impact player day one for your team, and a first-round pick for most NHL teams is a guy you won't see for 2 to 3 years. And that changes how long it takes you to turn things around. Man USA Fan Man Adams says, new patron here, appreciate your pod and listen to every episode, so I figured I should do my civic duty and put my money where my mouth is. Thank you so very much for your support and welcome to the Dub Dub Club. Says, not sure about you guys, but I think I'm ready for Yzerman to rip off a Band-Aid or two and jettison 1 or 2 vets in favor of developing younger players. What would you choose and who would you replace them with?
Kasper and anyone in the bottom 6. Genuinely don't care which one.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter, and I think you're going to see that happen naturally pretty soon here.
We better.
Michael Edlin says, I'm a Wings fan and living in Seattle, so one example of many Detroit fans living far from Detroit. I'm curious how far and wide the Winged Wheel Podcast Patreon community currently reaches. I will say we were number 1 in South Korea for hockey podcasts this past week, I believe it was. I actually messaged Frege because we ousted them out of the top spot. I said, I'm sorry, Elliot, but the people have spoken.
Didn't we have a meetup in Detroit? And this wasn't even when we had our big meetups. Like, it was one of the smaller meetups, first 2 or 3 we did, where we had Vancouver, Australia, and Tasmania all represented.
Yeah, like the longest possible flights you can think of were there. We're global, man. Winged Wheel Podcast, the Dub Dub Club is global. Clint Benesh says, cup window question. With where we are in this rebuild, is it more valuable to keep a first-round pick next year or trade it? If we trade it at the start of the season, what is a realistic return for it, and how much more value is there if it is unprotected at the start of the season? With where Detroit is at and how precarious the team is, that is a valuable first-round pick.
We just had our Atlantic predictions. My prediction for the Red Wings is that's going to be a top 12 pick. That's going to be very, very valuable. Is it completely untouchable? No, but that's going to have to be for someone like 23 or younger who just fell out of favor with their team. That's an elite talent. And we only see players like that come available once or twice every decade. So I wouldn't hold my breath for it. Plus, then you're getting into the advantages of entry-level contract, et cetera, et cetera. The Red Wings, to me, are still very much in a spot where I don't see any good options out there to move that pick.
Not that it's impossible to do it anymore. I don't think it's likely you're looking at a lottery pick, like top 2 pick anymore, where the Red Wings were in the past. So you definitely have a lot more latitude for the right deal, but it's the NHL. The right deal almost never happens. It's so rare that you get that magnitude of trade happening. So especially unprotected, you keep the pick. Because if this year goes south for Detroit and their plan fails and their defense just doesn't hold up and their goaltending falls out and their offense regresses, that's going to suck. And the organization's going to have a lot of questions. And they hopefully have a top-end player that they're drafting as well. Awit says, how far do you guys think the path is for Axel Sandin-Pellikka to get a spot on the roster? Does he come up and play in Grand Rapids next year, or should he be in the conversation for a roster spot at that point? I could see the team wanting him to get a year in Grand Rapids to get used to North American style hockey, but from what I've seen, he looks very good and wouldn't be surprised to see him sooner on the team.
I think the most likely path is 1 more year in Skelleftea, 1 year in Grand Rapids. I think he's talented enough that it's not crazy to think that he competes for a roster spot next year, especially when you look at what the Red Wings have in the organization right now on the right side of the defense. It leaves a lot to be desired, and that's probably the one part of the team where there's the most opportunity to grab a spot, just because it's Seider and then a bunch of old guys. So a bunch of old guys who aren't very good unless Gustafsson can play the right side effectively. So I think there's a chance, but I still think he'll need a year in Grand Rapids.
The physicality to me, is going to dictate it, but talent-wise, he's not far, if at all. Wheelman's Wallhouse says, I often hear folks talk about having two triggers on the power play of the same handedness, as though there isn't room for both. This has been mentioned in regards to Brandsegg-Nygard and Axel Sandin-Pellikka in Skelleftea, as well as Cole Caufield and Patrik Laine in Montreal. To me, power plays often look more dangerous when there are two shooters of the same handedness cycling, rotating in and out of their spots, keeping the defense guessing where the shot is coming from. Is it really a problem, or can it create a tactical advantage?
It is an absolute benefit if a team knows how to run that type of power play properly. The amount of teams that I have seen run that type of power play effectively begins and ends with Edmonton. So I am a big believer in a non-stationary power play. If anybody has ever been on my Twitter and paid attention to my Twitter on any Red Wings power play in the last 10 years, my never-ending complaining about how they are so stationary is apparent. I would like to see teams utilize more movement, and having two players of the same handedness allows that. But so few teams do it effectively that they just default to this.
They weren't the first to do it, and it's been happening for a while, but with how popular it is to have like the Florida-style aggressive PK, attack, where you really make other teams make mistakes, especially if you're playing a team who is not a power play weapon, like Edmonton, for example. If you force them, they're going to make mistakes. And if you're forcing a team that's stationary, oh my God, it's the lowest hanging fruit possible to kill that penalty. So yeah, that's why the movement is so important. Okay, we're going to wrap up this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Next episode is our huge one, the Detroit Red Wings 2024-2025 season preview. Make sure you tune in. Thank you to Steve Dangle for tuning into the show. Our friend with the hammer on the TV. I laughed my ass off when I saw him on there. Thank you so much for the sponsors of the Winged Wheel Podcast, and to all of our patrons. Thank you all so very much. Patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast if you want to support the Dub Club. Whole revamp thanks to Mel. Those tiers and the rewards are going to be fresh, new, exciting, and better for you. And there's more changes to come, all to make things even better. And if you want to support, but Patreon's not for you, leave a rating wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you're not subscribed on YouTube or Apple Podcasts and Spotify or multiple, it's a big, big help. And tell a friend about the show. Leave a thumbs up on YouTube, all that good stuff. To our name level supporters on Patreon, we cannot do this without you. Arjun Shankar, Yves Bartels on behalf of the Sarah Grand Foundation, Aikfer, Samuel Soderholm, Icon, Alexander Hansen, Victor Zetterberg, Ghost of OSBP, Glenn Brabham, Croner's Left Knee, Ashley Whitehead, Sea Lion, Matthew M. Rice, Adam Zowiza, I believe a brand new name level supporter. Welcome, Adam. Admiral Matt S. of the Cheesebag Navy, Asher Killian. Asher, great to see your name again. Thank you for being a name level supporter and a long, long time supporter of the Winged Wheel Podcast. Carl Brutinen-Aluski, Carl Provi, Citizen High Five, Clip Clop Naney, Connor Scovey, Craig Kibble, Denny's Gamer Girl, Derek Enstam, Cider, Dickens, formerly Marlon Winchester, DJ Denton, Eric Hill, God Creatives, Give Blood Fight Probert, Goose Looney's Drinking Club, Hockeytown Love, Hockeytown Matt, Hassam Al-Qassem, Jay Gollum, Jacob Turner, Jeff Pridemore, John Ingalls, Jonathan Miller, Kalen Wood, Ken Daniels, and Mickey Redmond, Give Me Life, Marcus, Marty, Matt Keeler, Matt McKay, Michael Edlund, Raul Pud, R.A., Mr. Kuzi, brand new name level supporter. Welcome, Mr. Kuzi, to the Dub Club. Riley Enright, Ryan Britt, Scott Martin, Skeletor, That's What I Appreciates About You, The New Jackson 5 Holes, Wallman's Elite Dancing D, Winged Boogie, Iserplan Stan, General Andy Bohan of the Cheesebag Army, Sam Bankson, A.A. Ron, A.B., Adam Rose, All Motor No Hands, and Stanislavski, Axel Sandy Pelika, Bellingham Acid Balls, Bex, brand new name level supporter, Big Sweaty Chungus, Chimkim Nutgets, Commander Ben Barron of the Cheesebag Space Force, Connor Leighton, Corey Prida, Darren Fick, Datsukes Dangleberries, Eric Nance, Frank Stanley, Gene Sullivan, Grepsky, Griffy Boy, James Pridemore, Jeremiah Dobo, Jim, JM Rapsy, Jim, I believe, is a brand new name level supporter, Joey Jojo Shabadoo, John Evans Derogatory, Josh Yelton, Keenan O'Donohue, Casper the Unfriendly Ghost, Kevin McCracken, Quaz, Les Grossman's Ungodly Firestorm, Linda Hull, Lucas Reitmond, new name level supporter, Ophelia, Steven, that other guy, new name level supporter, the Hodag, the Hat123, Trent Thorough, Wingsfan in Chi-Town, Wingsfan in St. Louis, Scott, and your second favorite patron. Thank you all so much. And if you're a new name level supporter and I miss you, tweet at Brad yelling at me. Thank you so much. I appreciate all of you. We appreciate all of you. Talk to you Wednesday for the season preview.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to check out wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find links to other ways to support the show, such as Patreon, official podcast apparel, and more. And don't forget to follow the show on Twitter at Winged Wheel Pod. And of course, the hosts at Brad Crisco, at Ryan Hanna WWP, and at Hockeytown Evan.